To those of us in fire protection and those of you in the fire service, the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire is one of the best known and most horrific fires in U.S. history. On Memorial Day weekend 1977, a fire tore through an overcrowded Kentucky nightclub, leaving behind incriminating ashes and a body count that demanded answers. It's a case studied in fire protection courses, cited in building code reform hearings, and remembered as a perfect storm of greed, negligence, and good old-fashioned government whoopsie-daisy. It became a rallying cry for reform and a flaming billboard reminder of what happens when people ignore fire codes in favor of full tables and fat wallets. Among the charred remains, one thing stood out: greed. The kind that places income above human life, that counts heads at the bar and not heads at the exits. The public outcry was immediate. A wave of grief and fury surged toward the officials who stood by, watched it all go wrong, and then acted surprised when it lit up like a Roman candle on Independence Day. And even if you believe the official story that the fire was accidental, you can't ignore the criminal level of negligence that turned a simple oops into a full-blown what the actual But beneath the official version, buried under decades of charred debris, sealed documents, and institutional shrugs, were whispers. Whispers that grew louder. Whispers that eventually took on the shape of accusations. Rumors. Stories from survivors and witnesses that never quite lined up with what officials claimed happened that night. Over time, those whispers gained weight, transforming into voices that refused to be ignored. Voices calling out inconsistencies, demanding accountability, and asking the one question no one in power seemed really interested in answering: what really happened? Eventually, those doubts coalesced into something heavier, not just suspicion, but allegations. Allegations that the investigation was flawed, or worse, that it was manipulated. That powerful political forces helped shape a narrative, one that conveniently overlooked critical evidence. Evidence that pointed to a fire that wasn't just tragic, but intentional. Malicious intent, neatly packaged as an electrical accident, a crime wrapped in cable insulation and signed off by silence. This series isn't just the story of a fire, it's the story of two competing narratives, both ending in the same unthinkable tragedy. In one version, it was criminal negligence, a deadly mix of greed, code violations, and officials who chose convenience over compliance, and 165 innocent victims paid the price. In the other, it was mass murder, orchestrated by a criminal syndicate that saw the club's vulnerabilities not as a risk, but as an opportunity. Arson with a purpose, a message sent in fire about exactly who really called the shots in Southgate, Kentucky. One version made the record books, backed by the official investigation and the widely respected National Fire Protection Association. But was their conclusion that the fire was accidental shaped by facts, or by what was already missing from the scene before their investigation even began? And what about the other version? Is the assertion of criminal intent just an overreach of grief, devastated victims and families searching for something, anything to blame? A boogeyman conjured in the shadows of minds desperate to believe that a fire this massive, this fast, and this fatal couldn't possibly be random? That only intent could explain this level of destruction? Because sometimes the only thing scarier than a fire set on purpose is one that wasn't. We're going to give you everything: the official story, the witness accounts, the ignored red flags, and the long winding history that led up to that horrific night of May 28, 1977. And I don't know which version is true, and we may never know, but I can tell you this. Each side offers some compelling arguments, but each side also has some powerful detractors. You may think you know the story of the Beverly Hills Supper Club fire, but do you know the whole story?
Do you know the story of the whole? Sorry.
We're digging into the ashes now on Crime to Burn. Accident or criminal conspiracy? You decide. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer, former firefighter, and current thorn in the side of corrupt systems everywhere.
And I'm Archdeacon Carl, of Steve's Sacred Snack Table.
As we dive into this big tangled conspiracy-soaked inferno of a case, we need your help solving a mystery of our own. Why are our Apple and Spotify ratings stuck in a cold, lonely corner, even though our listenership has more than quintupled in the past couple of months? Now, we're not pointing fingers, but if your tapping finger happens to be on the injured list, we send our most sincere wishes for a speedy recovery. And as part of your post-traumatic finger rehab, we strongly recommend the following physical therapy. Open Spotify or Apple, press those stars, 5 would be perfect, and then bask in the healing warmth of having helped an indie creator fight the algorithm. We don't mean to pester, but we do need your partnership to prove to the podcast powers that be that Crime to Burn is pretty damn poppin'.
Damn, dude, that's a lot of pee action right there. You just peed all over your own podcast.
And if you've already left a review, we love you. You can sit back and judge everyone else silently from your morally superior star-tapping throne. And we have more prestigious news on the horizon. Soon, dear listener, you could be enjoying Crime to Burn ad-free. That's right, by the end of this summer, we'll be launching our Patreon. And if you've ever screamed into the void during an ad break about mattresses, meal kits, or that one guy whose voice sounds unnaturally thrilled about dental insurance, salvation is near. So start saving your silver, or at least your spare change, because the Cult of Steve is about to offer you spiritual relevance, fire stories that burn through the noise, and the sweet, blessed satisfaction of an ad-free listening experience. Stay tuned, Steve is watching. And while he deeply disapproves of podcast ads, he understands that podcasting, like sin, court records, and gasoline, is not free. Info on how to join is coming soon. The Cult of Steve is ready to welcome you. Come for the fire stories. Stay for the spiritual rebranding. And don't worry, for those of you unwilling to conform, Crime to Burn will always remain free, but with ads, sad trombone, on your favorite podcast platforms. And even if you're not ready to join the Cult of Steve, you can still help us grow and maybe help us pay off some of those hosting fees by doing something incredibly noble and brave, telling people that we exist. Our audience is out there somewhere, probably Googling true crime podcasts that don't suck, and we need your help getting their attention. Follow us on all your favorite social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and yes, even the unhinged experience that is X. We're still emotionally processing the name change, be gentle. We post educational yet unhinged content with just the right amount of chaos. So go find us, slap some likes and hearts on our content, leave a comment, save it to your favorites, share it to your stories, DM it to your weird cousin and your cool one. We accept both graciously, or correct my grammar in the comments. Honestly, everything helps algorithmically. But we can't crack the charts without you, but with your help we might just burn our way to the top. And hey, you can even tell strangers about us silently by wearing our logo. Assuming you leave the house. No judgment if you don't. Honestly, we support cryptid core. But even if your social circle consists of your cat and your favorite blanket, you can still throw on some Crime to Burn merch and snap a selfie, post it to the gram, and tag us. It does help spread the word without saying a word. It's delightfully stylish, borderline spiritual, and honestly, it would look fantastic on you. Hit the link in our show notes to check out our spread shop and grab some merch, because nothing says cult member but in a chill way like repping your favorite fire podcast in soft, breathable cotton. And as always, our inbox, crimetoburn@gmail.com, is open for your fire stories, case suggestions, and pledges of loyalty. I personally review every message, and I'll make sure to forward those straight to Steve so he knows you're open to assimilation into the tribe. Don't be shy. Steve sees all, but he especially appreciates a well-written email. And we do have several case suggestions, some really great ones, and I want you all to know that we will cover them. Your patience will be rewarded. But as long as I must maintain gainful employment, my ability to forge through the episodes is, how shall we say, slightly restricted by capitalism. Your hosts, tragically, were not born with trust funds, so for now we operate on the humble timeline of what I can reasonably produce in a week while also surviving real life. But rest assured, we've got your cases in queue, and they are coming.
They're coming so hard.
Before we dive in, let's talk about sources. I use two main sources for this series. The first is a book by Ron Elliott called Inside the Beverly Hills Supper Club Fire. The second is The Beverly Hills Supper Club, The Untold Story Behind Kentucky's Worst Tragedy by Robert D. Webster. I do recommend both with a few caveats. The Untold Story can get a little more repetitive, and there are some grammar errors here and there, but if you're looking for cited, documented sourcing for the conspiracy elements of this case, it's a solid choice. But the style isn't super narrative, so it's really ideal if you're looking into the case more from a research standpoint than from an entertain me standpoint. Elliott's book is primarily told through the lens of Wayne Dammert, an employee who was there the night of the fire. It's well-researched, and his first-hand account is harrowing and gives the story a bit more of a narrative feel that keeps the momentum up. But just a heads up, because this was a really horrific fire, and both books contain photos, not easy ones, and if you're sensitive to graphic content or trauma imagery, proceed with caution. That said, I'll include both in the show notes for those of you that want to dig deeper into the case. Because even in a multi-part arc, I'll only be covering the highlights. This case is massive. And while I'll do my best to be thorough with this is not going to be a complete telling, not unless I launch an entirely separate podcast just for this fire, which I cannot do due to the aforementioned day job, lack of a trust fund, and the ever-cruel demands of capitalism. And because this fire happened in the 1970s, many survivors and the family members of those who didn't make it out are still with us. So if you're one of those people and you'd like to share your story, clarify something, or just reach out, you can email me at crimetoburn@gmail.com. I promise to treat your voice and this case with care. It was May 28, 1977, and in northern Kentucky, just across the river from Cincinnati, Ohio, the Beverly Hills Supper Club was the place to be.
Now that's confusing. Consider our listeners abroad. You just said the Beverly Hills thing that is not in California, that's near Ohio, that's actually in Kentucky. Where the f*** are we?
So it's just over the river from Cincinnati in Kentucky. And it was called the Beverly Hills Supper Club. That's in a part of Kentucky that's still like part of the suburban area around Cincinnati.
Everyone else in the rest of the world is going, what the skibbity?
Yeah. The sprawling complex was enormous, a fire marshal's worst fever dream. Multiple dining rooms, cocktail lounges, a cabaret room that regularly drew some of the biggest names in entertainment, officially ready to receive roughly 700 patrons, but estimates vary based on source. However, club owners would sell up to 1,200 tickets for shows, packing the room well beyond its listed capacity. Guests came to see acts like Liberace, Dean Martin, Phyllis Diller, Tony Bennett, Frankie Valli, and the Righteous Brothers, basically the Mount Rushmore of polyester tuxedos. And if you were lucky, you might find yourself enjoying a drink at the bar next to a local celebrity, an out-of-town politician, trying to look inconspicuous. Or even a national figure like Rosemary Clooney, a northern Kentucky native known to drop in when she was visiting her home, Milton Berle or Jerry Lewis, who probably couldn't go anywhere without making a bit of a scene. Glitzy, glamorous, and packed nearly every weekend, the Beverly Hills Supper Club wasn't just a night out, it was an event. Locals called it the showplace of the nation. And with that kind of name, you know there were sequins and uncomfortable shoes involved. But at 9:06 p.m. on May 28, 1977, 17-year-old Walter Bailey was uncomfortable, and not just because of the polyester blend clinging to his armpits. He was standing in the back of the cabaret room, and he knew this club was on fire. What he didn't know was why no one had stopped the show in the cabaret room to evacuate it. The cabaret room was packed, and not a "this is a popular show" packed, a code violation of epic proportions packed. Patrons awaiting headliner John Davidson, a golden-voiced, feathered-haired heartthrob of the 70s, were wedged in like sardines, the crowd nearly double the room's legal capacity. An opening act was on stage, management was nowhere to be found, and Bailey, a teenager mind you, was left with the unthinkable choice. Wait and hope somebody in charge stepped up, or grab the mic and interrupt the show and tell all 1,200 people to get the hell out of the building. He chose the mic. Because sometimes the adults in the room aren't acting like adults. Walter was 17 or 18 depending on the source, but clearly old enough to realize that wait and see is a terrible evacuation strategy. So while the grown-ups were busy playing hot potato with responsibility, Walter stepped up, took the mic, and did what no one else had. He told a room packed wall-to-wall with polyester and martinis that it was time to get the hell out. But apparently, some patrons couldn't hear him over the clink of martinis, the creak of vinyl booths, and the collective rustling of synthetic fabrics. Walter calmly took the stage and told the crowd that there was a small fire on the other side of the building, calmly pointed out the exits, keeping his tone measured, probably hoping to avoid panic and a stampede, which would have been great if the patrons that could hear him had all listened. Some of them, maybe even many of them, did heed the warning and began making their way toward the exits to leave, but a lot of people in that room did not. because small fire in a building that big sounded like a job for a fire extinguisher and a damp cocktail napkin. The kind of thing that would be handled before intermission was over, so John Davidson could go on as planned. And instead of recognizing that this teenage kid made the call that helped save perhaps hundreds of lives that night, the press decided to kick the kid while he was still covered in soot. They blamed him, said he downplayed the danger, didn't sound urgent enough, as if it were his job to deliver a Pulitzer-caliber fire warning, while the adults with actual authority were apparently struggling just to grasp the magnitude of the situation and hoping someone else would do the hard but heroic thing. There was no fire alarm, no PA system, so the spread of that message, it was just barely outrunning the fire itself, and soon the fire would pull ahead in the race between notification and incineration. And it took a teenager to do the one thing that every adult in that building should have done: recognize that an overcrowded structure with no sprinkler system and no fire alarm isn't a wait-and-see situation. It's a move-your-sequined ass to the exit situation. But while the grown-ups were busy weighing pros and cons or just hoping somebody else would step up, Walter took action. Swift, gutsy, life-saving action, and he deserved a medal. Instead, the media grabbed a magnifying glass and aimed it straight at a soot-covered teenager, dissecting his word choice like he was the villain, in a story that already had plenty of bad actors. The kid tried to do the right thing, and he shouldn't have had to do it alone. But the patrons in the cabaret room, the ones that did hear him but didn't heed his warning, they didn't know one key detail, that the room didn't even meet the minimum required number of exits. It had 3, when code required 4. And those 3, each one had its own functional issue, because apparently escape routes were more of a suggestion than a necessity. To make matters worse, the room wasn't just full, it was stuffed, overpacked, sardine can style. Estimates vary depending on the source, but to fit the massive crowd that bought tickets for the show, management had reconfigured the layout to squeeze in extra seats. And most estimates are that there were at least 1,000 people in that room, but there may have been much, much more. The ticket records that would have revealed the actual number were obviously lost in the fire, but we can make some inferences from the seating layout, and it was insanity. Extra chairs and tables were brought in, chairs even lined the ramps that led up to the stage. And more chairs meant more tickets, and more tickets meant more money. And exits don't generate revenue. But cutting corners? That's profitable, until the bill comes due. As the first fire engines rolled up the hill to the Beverly Hills Supper Club, things looked oddly promising. There were people outside, lots of people, which for a structure fire is usually a good sign. The officer in charge had a fleeting moment of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, everyone had made it out. But that optimism was misplaced. Not everyone had made it out, not by a long shot. Turns out that first impressions can be like advertising claims of the newest weight loss fad, dangerously misleading. Because inside that sprawling death trap were jammed exits, narrow and twisting hallways, and hundreds of people choking on smoke with no clear way out. Everyone did not escape, not even close. By the time the night was over, 165 lives were gone. Because in a building where style trumped safety, the show went on and the audience paid the ultimate price. But to understand how so many people lost their lives that night, we have to rewind back to the beginning, before Saturday Night Fever lit up the dance floor, before Elvis left the building for good, and before the Voyager probes left Earth, to how the Beverly Hills Supper Club came to be. Because this isn't just a fire story, it's a story about money and power, and the kind of decisions that get made when no one's watching, or worse, when they are, but they're being paid not to care, allegedly.
Like a porno producer.
Because the Beverly Hills Supper Club wasn't born a fire trap. It became one, brick by brick, bribe by bribe, allegedly, renovation by conveniently overlooked regulation. And the ghosts of those choices were already haunting the place long before the first flicker of a flame. To understand how the Beverly Hills Supper Club would grow into such a glittering death trap, you need to know a little something about the place where it lived, Southgate, Kentucky. It was a sleepy little town on paper, but don't let the map fool you. It's set just across the Ohio River from Cincinnati, barely a 10-minute drive from downtown if traffic was light. Close enough to be convenient, far enough to avoid too many questions. And for decades, it was a place where the shadows ran a little thicker. Because Southgate wasn't just suburbia, not back then. This particular corner of northern Kentucky was once dubbed the original Sin City, the Vegas of the East, a playground for gamblers, gangsters, and anyone looking to make money off the books. And for a long time they did, with the help of a little protection from the local powers that be. The Chicago outfit had Vegas, the Cleveland mob had Youngstown, and Newport, the town right next to Southgate, was all but carved up by the Cleveland and Detroit crime families, with a few other players sprinkled in for good measure. The law, let's just say that they allegedly had a price tag. And in this part of Kentucky, for the right envelope, codes could get overlooked, buildings could be rubber stamped, and the inconvenient code problems could just sort of disappear. Again, all allegedly. In 1957, fresh out of the Navy and looking for work, Wayne Dammert found himself eyeing a job at the Beverly Hills Supper Club. It was glamorous, it was busy, and it was hiring. It was also allegedly a mafia front. Wayne's mother didn't mix words. That place is run by the mob, she warned, and honestly, she probably wasn't wrong. The area had a reputation. Nearby Newport was known for offering Vegas-style thrills without the inconvenience of Vegas-style regulations. Gambling? Easy. Prostitution? Plentiful. And if you needed something to take the edge off or jack you up for the night, that could be arranged too.
What does jack you up for the night mean?
You know, like uppers.
Oh.
Drugs.
Like?
Mind candy.
It's so awkward to hear you describe drugs.
But Wayne, like a lot of people trying to get a foot in the door, didn't have the luxury of being picky. A job was a job, and the Beverly Hills Supper Club wasn't just slinging steaks. It offered a front row seat to the most elite clientele in town, the kinds of folks most people only saw in magazines. Movie stars, TV personalities, politicians with too much money and not enough morals, and of course the women. Chorus girls straight out of central casting, bedecked in feathers and dripping with rhinestones and aspirations. For a young guy trying to make his way, it was a paycheck and a show.
That's hot.
And if you had to turn a blind eye to a few things to get it, well, plenty of people already were. In Dammert's first-hand account of his early days working at the Beverly Hills Supper Club, absolute chaos. The kind of chaos that knew how to smile for the customers. There was open Vegas-style gambling set up on top of regulation pool tables. Why? Because if the cops rolled in, the dealers could flip a switch, trigger an alarm, and the entire operation could vanish in about a minute. Cards, chips, tables, poof. By the time authorities made it through the front doors, it looked like a quiet night with a few gentlemen politely lining up their next shot. And if that's not a metaphor for how this place operated, I don't know what is. Dammert recounted how when the alarm blared, chaos kicked in like a choreographed Broadway number, just with more green felt and fewer jazz hands. Casino dealers scrambled to dismantle the setup, cramming cards and chips into any crevice they could find, usually in the women's restroom. He remembered the scandalized squeals of ladies mid-lipstick touch-up as dealers burst into stalls, shoving blackjack gear against the porcelain thrones like their lives, or at least their paychecks and plausible deniability, depended on it. But here's the punchline. There was never a raid, not once, at least while Dammert was there, because the people doing the raiding, they were allegedly already on the payroll. And the alarms? They were just false alarms, because when you're running an illegal casino for folks who know 18 different ways to make a body disappear, a little paranoia is practically policy.
That's good alliteration.
By the 1960s, Campbell County had grown tired of mafia rule. Gambling had become a nearly $20 million a year business, which might have stayed under the radar if it weren't for all the pesky side effects. Drug crimes, dead bodies, and a growing number of citizens who weren't on the take and were getting real tired of murder topping the headlines. By 1961, cleaning up crime in Campbell County wasn't just political posturing, it was a full-blown ballot box crusade. And when the anti-gambling candidates won in landslides, that was the end of openly illegal casinos in northern Kentucky. Some folks packed up their dice and headed for drier turf, places like Vegas where the lights were bright, the chips were legal, and nobody had to shove a craps table into a bathroom stall when company arrived. Slowly, the strippers and prostitutes followed suit, packing up their G-strings, pasties, and dreams of showgirl stardom to make the trek to the bright lights of Vegas. And just like that, Campbell County started polishing its image into something that looked more Saturday Evening Post and less hustler. But don't worry, the families didn't leave town. They just changed their wardrobe. Out went the smoky back rooms, and in came the clean-cut businessmen, heavy on the air quotes, the silent partnerships, the seemingly legitimate investments. Instead of openly illegal, they shifted to less trustworthy backroom dealings and under-the-table envelopes. Because no matter how many tough-on-crime politicians got elected, there was always a palm to grease, and always someone ready to call it just business. But the old Beverly Hills Supper Club, the casino, that didn't survive the changing tides. It shuttered quietly, a relic of a glitzier, grimier era, and Wayne Dammert, now a married father of 4, figured it was just a colorful footnote in his past. Until one night in 1970 when fate and an old acquaintance pulled him back in. Richard Dick Schilling, a local restaurateur and former Beverly Hills regular, ran into Dammert and in so many words said, "Let's get the band back together." He had big ideas and deeper pockets, and he'd bought the old Beverly Hills Supper Club and planned to resurrect it. Not just as a restaurant and a club, but as the destination. Weddings, banquets, high society nights under low lights, new chandeliers, grand staircases, and glamour without the grime. But before the sparkle could go into the building, someone had to deal with the rot. The building, abandoned now for years, was aging poorly and it was in rough shape. When Dammert agreed to tour the site, he found the ghosts hadn't exactly moved out. One room showed signs of a recent fire, scorched walls, the lingering scent of smoke, vandals maybe, or vagrants trying to stay warm. It was nothing catastrophic. But maybe it was a quiet warning. If it was, it went unheeded. But even further back in the building's shadowy past, there had been a warning, a loud, flaming, and unmistakable warning. Years before Dammert ever stepped foot inside, way back in the 1930s, a turf war broke out between local crime families and the club's original owner. The solution? Arson. Because nothing says, "We disagree with your business model," like a gasoline-soaked ultimatum. At the time, a caretaker and his family were living upstairs, and they barely made it out. There was no fire escape on the upper floor, a nearly fatal oversight, and one that should have carved itself into memory. But by the time Schilling laid out his vision for his new Beverly Hills nightclub, the ghosts of that fire were filed under ancient history, and the new plans included glitz, glamour, but still no fire escape. It was a choice that would come dangerously close to costing Wayne Dammert his life 7 years later when the flames came calling again. But the road to reopening wasn't all chandeliers and champagne for Schilling. There were obstacles. One of the biggest? The building inspector.
He was huge.
Now this job had been notoriously hard to fill. Maybe because it required actual knowledge of things like life safety, structural integrity, and basic building codes. So naturally, the city gave it to the best candidate that they had available, a bricklayer. Not an architect, not an engineer. A guy who knew his way around a trowel, sure, but code compliance? Let's just say he was building more on vibes than on regulations. And look, no shade to the man's work ethic. By all accounts, he gave it the old college try. But those familiar with his expertise have said he was about as useful as a boat made out of cotton candy.
That's very useful to me.
If you want to go swimming.
When I have my Viking funeral, please make the boat of cotton candy.
Okay. Before Wayne Dammert even left the job site, someone had already floated the idea of bringing him back on board, this time as a waiter, not a blackjack dealer, and Wayne was considering it. But on June 22nd, 1970, Schilling's big comeback dream went up in smoke, literally. The Beverly Hills Supper Club burned down, gutting the building and leaving only the exterior walls. Was it arson? A little welcome back note from the old families? Was it an accident? It's hard to say, but the timing was suspicious. The renovations were nearly complete. The grand opening had been just around the corner, and suddenly, it was all ash and rubble. And funny enough, it wasn't the first restaurant project in the area to mysteriously catch fire right before opening night. Seems like the local crime syndicates had opinions that they expressed in smoke signals, allegedly. But Dick Schilling, either he didn't get the message, or he read it, scoffed, and lit a cigar with it.
Dick Schilling?
Mm-hmm. Because weeks after the fire, he was back at it. New plans, new renovations, new chandeliers. Like the phoenix in a tuxedo, the Beverly Hills Supper Club was rising from the ashes with even more sequins. And on February 10th, 1971, it opened for business. The ink was barely dry on the certificate of occupancy, issued just 24 hours before the grand opening. Nothing like cutting it close when your building has a history of spontaneous combustion and unresolved mob drama. But the party didn't last long. Just 2 weeks after the grand opening, headlines on February 26th made things awkward. The state fire marshal had not approved the club for operation. Their reasons? A greatest hits list of fire code violations, not enough exits, open stairwells with no enclosures, and interior finishes that didn't even meet the bare minimum safety standards. But the Beverly Hills Supper Club, it was business as usual. Because when your chandeliers are sparkling and the money's rolling in, who has time for pesky things like egress? Wayne Dammert had accepted the job, and the guests kept coming in and the music played on. And weeks later, when a grand jury convened to take a closer look at whether the club was safe to operate, their final report claimed the club had complied with all the fire regulations. The owner had also promised to train employees in fire prevention and firefighting, once employment stabilized. Because nothing says safety first like we'll get around to it eventually. As for what was actually said in the grand jury room, well, those records were sealed. Which in stories like this is just another way to say transparency is for suckers. The kind of suckers who think codes are enforced, rules are followed, and fire exits are more than just decorative suggestions. Oh, and that architect who drew up the plans? Yeah, he wasn't licensed. Because why let credentials get in the way of your dreams?
That's been my motto the whole time.
It almost sounds like the setup to a joke. A bricklayer, an unlicensed architect, and a restaurateur walk into an old casino and decide to open a nightclub. What could possibly go wrong? Answer, 165 funerals, but we're getting to that. See, one of the most dangerously charming things about the Beverly Hills Supper Club was that on paper it looked fine. But the paper was about as honest as a forged alibi and half as sturdy. Over the next several years, Dick Schilling's ideas grew as the club's prosperity increased and renovations piled on, room after room, expansion after expansion. Walls were added with no real understanding of what they were supporting. And some of those walls, they were non-load bearing, which is a polite way of saying they were never meant to hold up a damn thing, not the chandeliers, not the crowd capacity, and definitely not a ceiling in the middle of a fire. But thanks to bad records, cut corners, and maybe a few envelopes passed under tables, allegedly, the building kept growing like a tumor with blueprints. Some walls were slapped together with wood paneling over drywall, and some weren't properly fire-stopped, and a few were somehow both essential and completely undocumented. The structural equivalent of a ghost with a day job. And when the fire hit those mystery walls, they didn't hold. They funneled smoke, collapsed under pressure, and turned what should have been exit paths into traps, literal dead ends. And with this maze of additions and legal make-believe, Dick Schilling built an icon of Northern Kentucky nightlife, one chandelier at a time. But for all the cash he poured into the dream, two things never made it into the budget: a sprinkler system or a fire alarm system. Because Dick wasn't thinking about fire safety. He was thinking about profitability, about packed tables, sold-out shows, and the kind of glamour that gets you written up in society pages, not safety citations.
He's just taking it one Dick Schill at a time.
Now, was it malicious? I don't think so, but it was naive, short-sighted, and not without a little hubris, the kind that assumes nothing bad will happen. But fires don't have to be intentional to be criminal, and there's a term for that, criminal negligence. Because when that's your mindset, disaster doesn't need an invitation. It festers in concealed spaces, grows in silence, and waits until all those naive decisions come roaring into focus as 165 people scramble for exits that didn't exist but should have. Next week on Crime to Burn, we'll walk through the facility layout and the code violations that set the stage for this tragedy. In part 2 of Built to Burn, the untold conspiracy of the Beverly Hills Supper Club.
Look, I brought notes.
I see that.
I found producer notes on my keyboard.
Spoiler alert, most of my homework was a mess. It was brilliant, if I do say so myself, but it was a mess.
Like some kind of psycho handed this in. Oh yeah, that's nearly readable.
In 4th grade, one of my classmates had really unique handwriting, and she was bragging about how nobody had handwriting that looked like hers, and it was so pretty. So I took something that she wrote and I mimicked it, and I spent the entire year writing everything exactly like she had done it, and I got the handwriting award that year. My mom was so proud, because my handwriting was normally insane, but I just did it out of spite.
Well, at least you didn't just break her fingers or something.
No, I'm not a violent person.
Took the high road.
I'm a petty person, but not violent. Mom wants to know if we saw any fireworks yesterday. The ones we bought and lit ourselves and managed not to burn down anything we didn't intend to.
We didn't burn down anything at all.
And that was our intention, because we're not arsonists.
Yet.
I don't think I'm ever going to be an arsonist. But it would have to be like arson for a really good cause, and I can't think of any good cause for arson right now.
What about for the children?
How would an arson benefit children?
What if they were trapped in an igloo? It would really just melt, right? Can you burn down an igloo even? Just cover it in icy hot? Confuse the ice. Oh man, I thought I was going to throw down sublimation before you could. But you never stop. You just keep on going. No room for air. No room for anyone else to talk. Just you going, never stopping. Just always talking. Never giving anyone else any room. How do you even breathe like this? How do you do this?
Even the horse was sweaty.
Horses are usually a little sweaty. This episode's brought to you by Awkward Horse Maintenance. Wear gloves.
Yes, the child learned more about horse maintenance yesterday than she intended to.
But I did not know that that was a part of horse maintenance. Thank God for cars. Okay, no. Like, I'll change a tire. I'll change the oil. I'll put some fluid in the radiator. I ain't doing that, man. That's not... No.
Your aunt was showing the child how to get up in there and clean all the dirt out. And she was looking at me like, you're not really going to make me do that, right? I'm like, get in there. She was displeased.
It doesn't work if you can still see your elbow.
And we gave her gloves.
Do you think this kind of maintenance is more awkward for us or the horses? I'm trying to think who I'd rather be in this situation, you know?
And how to maintenance the undercarriage of the horse.
Booby bath. A little nipple misting and a spit shine.
That our child will never ask to own a horse.
Did you see the cow that was out there?
Mm-hmm.
It looked like it was doing finger guns.
Yeah, they're weaning its baby.
But it looked like it was two people giving finger guns at each other. Or no, they were back to back doing finger guns. This episode's brought to you by Nipple Fingers. Engorged, swollen nipple fingers. The last thing we want is froggy voices. You are, of course, unworthy of most things, yet take solace in this one small mercy. You are always worthy of precisely one snack, no more. Do not gaze upon Steve for too long. Do not question his purpose. Simply accept that he is here, watching. You over there croaking?
Ribbit.
Rub what?
Ribbit. For her pleasure.
We need more flaming billboards.
Not like this. I don't know, I feel weirdly out of breath.
It might be because you're not breathing between words. Breathe, my friend. And I'm Archdeacon Carl of the Sacred of the Trips Over Your Own Tongue. Look, I worked in alliteration.
No, I'm waiting for the child to swap her battery.
Oh dear. She's not a real child. She has batteries. You're not Naruto running. You went into defensive mode. You didn't know she had a weapon.
Oh, man. I can't put that in there.
That's what she said. Oh, call me Butter.
Butter?
I'm on a roll. Butter? Man, you're good at jokes. You're amazing. And this is why we don't go live. You're in a different room, not a different dimension. We can totally hear you. Podcasting is hard.
Jam it in the hole.
Boop. You're tooting your own little horn, knock it off. My God, man. What have you done? What did you think would happen?
I thought people would giggle.
This is my super serious face. It's also my O face. What is cryptid core?
You know, like people that are all into like the cryptids and big...
Oh, so it's not a musical genre?
No.
Cryptid core. Yes, I am the bog bubbler. Are you just poking capitalism in the eye because you're a dirty socialist?
No, it's because that's how I make my money.
By being a dirty socialist?
By being a dirty capitalist.
I think there's a way to explain this probably, but...
I think we just did.
Do people know? Oh. No, we need to form a focus group. What's the worst thing you can imagine? Life with Milton Berle strapped to your back. Dante didn't mention that level of hell.
Code violation of ethic.
F your proportions, dude. I think you should hammer that more.
Be
I
handled.
could think of something else you could do with a fire extinguisher and a damp cocktail napkin.
What, get us arrested?
That's probably going to be the end result. Go back to the damp napkin. I think I know how I would do it. And no one would listen to me either. Sounds like we're back in LA again. So many bad actors. I've heard them call it blow, but it seems like they're reversing the flow. They're hoovering that stuff up.
Yeah, why don't we call it vacuum instead of blow? I guess hooker and vacuum doesn't sound as cool as hookers and blow.
Blow seems to have the reverse meaning sometimes in certain contexts. You're not trying to inflate someone's balls. I said blow, but what I really meant was not that. But I can't work that out logistically, like how...
We can try it later. I could raspberry all over that.
That's gonna be a meme. What was I doing? Were they naked?
No. And if you had to turn a blind...
If you had to turn a blind, make sure to signal first. That becomes oddly specific, doesn't it?
Yeah, don't picture that. That's not what I meant. Packing their G-strings, pasties, and dreams of showgirl stardom.
Where did they pack them?
I didn't ask that part.
Where do you pack a pasty?
In your suitcase?
Is there a pasty pouch?
Maybe.
She made air quotes right around the dick. Each side of the dick there was an air quote. You have demonstrated your ineptitude repeatedly through your endless quarrels and your lack of discipline, and your inability to love anything other than your own reflection. You will never be capable of loving one another. So love Steve. I like this cult business, man. It's fun.
I know. You always wanted your own cult, didn't you?
Well, it wasn't so much that I wanted one, it's just that everyone expected me to start one.
I didn't realize you were trying to start a cult.
I actually wasn't.
Oh.
That's the irony. My recruitment strategy was ass if that was my goal. But now we have better methods. Be afraid. Do you think there's a super cell of super agers that'll rain down terror?
No, they won't be raining down terror, but...
Probably urine.
You're so wrong.
But I'm so right for you. I make no apologies for the insects in this room. They can apologize for themselves.
Fly, come apologize. Why is Chad wearing 2 hats?
Well, like you, he has several jobs. Spindly appendages. I'm your little canary in the coal mine.
I try to keep them bite-sized.
Yeah, but you got a big mouth. Let's get this model on its way! Say hello to my little friend! This is why we need a gong. Ah, this thing just touched me in the face! We're about to have a catastrophe in this room.
He's the only dog I've ever seen that gets that jazzed up about laser pointers.
He does not accept the red light.
Thinking of joining a cult? Don't be basic. Join the cult. Join the cult of Steve. When you join the cult of Steve, you will receive a certificate of enlightenment and a fire safety plan written entirely in haiku.
The person who tries to replace you at your job is going to find some really weird shoes to fill.
The cult of Steve, it's not a pyramid scheme. It's a triangular enlightenment structure.
I like triangles.
I'm just here for your triangular enlightenment structure.
Gee, that's a resilient fly. I just saw him go by. What is this, a Terminator fly?
We broke our dog's favorite toy.
Let's get out of here before something dies.
Okay. Oops.
Ooh.
Hi there, I'm award-winning stand-up comedian Taylor Ruddle from New Zealand. Podcasts? Yeah, we got them too. And in my podcast, Ruddle Me This, you get a front row seat seeing exactly what it's like trying to come up in this crazy business that is stand-up comedy. I interview other comedians and artists from different disciplines,
as well as other generally interesting people from around New Zealand.
Oh, and we also do spooky paranormal episodes. Ooh. So if this mix of eclectic nonsense appeals to you, download Rattle Me This on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcatcher.